Hello, class. Today's lecture coincides with chapter 1 of your text. It's a fairly long chapter. We're probably looking at about 25 pages, and there's a lot of details and a lot of data contained within the chapter. So I'm going to hit on some of the main points, and a lot of what I hit on is going to be included within your quiz. But as you read the chapter, you need to get into the finer detail a little bit of what some of those concepts and conceptualizations, definitions are within the chapter. So for our lecture today, these are some of the things we're going to go over. We're going to start talking about key terms that are associated with international human resource management. And some of those are similar to what a domestic human resource manager might come across. Some are unique to international resource management. So as we go through this lecture, when we come across those terms or definitions, I will make sure to point them out and make sure that you get a good definition of those. But also, again, within the chapter, there's going to be a lot of definitions that you're going to encounter. So make sure you become familiar with kind of the language of international human resource management. We're going to introduce the term expatriate, and that's going to be important because when you're dealing with international human resource managers, a lot of times you're dealing with individuals from your host country, the domestic country, and they're going to be assigned to a foreign entity, a foreign country, to work. So those are called those individuals are called expatriates, and there's a whole bunch of complexity that goes along with deploying somebody, managing somebody, and then even bringing somebody back. And usually the biggest problem that human resource managers encounter is when they're bringing back somebody who's been abroad for a while. So we'll get into some of those issues. We'll outline the differences between domestic and international human resource management. That's going to be important too. So we're going to see a lot of the same duties and functions that a domestic human resource manager does on an international basis. But what you need to keep in mind is going to be much broader in scope. It's much easier for me to recruit somebody. It's much easier for me to do training and development. It's much easier to administer compensation benefits. When you move abroad, when you're talking about managing those things from afar, it becomes a lot broader and a lot more difficult in scope. So keep that in mind. It's not like we're doing our functions as international human resource managers is way different than a domestic HR manager. Those duties just become broader and a little more difficult. There's more complexity involved with performing those duties. And again, just some of the challenges that are associated with international human resource manager. Specifically, what we'll look at are you're used to doing different types of strategic analysis through different classes. You've come across things like SWOT analysis, Porter's 5 Force analysis. You've done internal external analysis before, which is usually part of SWOT. We're going to talk about those internal and external factors through a different model called the PESTO model, where again it's just a little different when we're dealing with the international market. So let's talk about human resource management activities in general. Okay, so these are if you look either domestically or internationally, these are the functions of a human resource manager. So human resource planning, you need to plan who you're going to need, what skills, knowledge, and abilities those people are going to have. Where am I going to get these people? So it really is a strategic planning. It's sitting down and saying, what type of individuals do we need, and where are we going to get them? How often are we going to need them? And then doing that type of planning. So both domestic and international, that happens. But you can see, again, when we talk about complexities, you can see how it gets a little more difficult when we're talking about a company that's not in the host country versus our own domestic company. Staffing, recruitment, selection, and placement, very big. Performance management, that's difficult enough when you're talking about people who are within our organization. But when you're doing performance management, and you're not exposed to that individual on a day-to-day basis, maybe like you are domestically, it becomes a lot more difficult. Training and development. Again, I could plan training sessions in the business that I work at, and I can ensure that people are coming. I could keep records that they were there. When you're doing it from afar, it becomes a little more difficult. Compensation and benefits. We have a whole slew of issues that are associated with that, including taxation, exchange rates with the foreign country. That is probably one of the most difficult. Understanding all those laws associated with various countries where we might have multinational sites. Industrial relations. Sometimes we have unions here, and we have to deal with those unions. Other places we may be dealing with unions. We may be dealing with the government when we're talking about labor relations. So that gets very sticky sometimes and difficult. So I've said probably 1,000 times before, international human resource management is a more complex thing to manage. So there's more HR activities. Okay, you're going to be involved in more. There's a need for a broader perspective, more activities. There's great distance. There's complexity. There's host country issues that need to be dealt with. So you really need to take a broader perspective when you're looking at the IHRM. You need to have more involvement in the employees' lives. You need to really be aware of how the person is adjusting. Are they satisfied over there? Are they encountering issues? Do they have common language issues? Are there other socio or cultural issues that they may be having over there? So you do need to become more involved in the employees' lives when they're on foreign soil. You need to change emphasis as the mix of expatriates and locals varies. So do I have more people coming from my host country and working overseas, and is that ratio changing? And as it changes, the way I manage has to change. There's more risk exposure. There's no question about this. We live in a very different world than it was 20 and 30 years ago. And we have issues from terrorism to government overthrows, exchange rates, economic issues. So there's so many issues that we need to be aware of. And there's so much more risk that we're exposed to. So we really need to strategically plan around those risks and come up with contingency plans. Because, again, you go back to 9/11, there were a lot of individuals from foreign soil working at those World Trade Towers. And, at the time, I don't think risk exposure was maybe number one on the list of things to worry about. But after that date, it really became that way. So you really need to be aware of what are the risk exposures to the particular countries that we're dealing with. And they're going to be different from maybe somebody who's working in China to somebody who's working in Russia or Europe. Those risk exposures are going to be different. And there's broader external influences. If I'm just worrying about my own domestic external influence, I have a little more, not necessarily control, but I have a little better idea of what's going on. I know what's going on politically here. I know what's going on, for the most part, economically here. I know what the labor market looks like. I know all those things, and I'm fairly confident in them. Seems to be a lot more volatility overseas and changing dynamics. So there are broader external influences overseas. Some of the different activities. Now, again, we talked about some similar activities. There are some different activities, though. International taxation. We need to be aware of what the taxation laws in the countries that we're dealing with. And that's for selling products, that's for buying products, that's for compensation and benefits. So all those different international taxation laws we need to be aware of. International relocation and orientation. Very difficult. You have to make sure that all the paperwork is in order for somebody who's traveling. If they're traveling then maybe between countries, you have to make sure that employees has all that required paperwork before they go. I recently took a trip to Mexico to go to a conference, and I had my passport, but it wasn't a passport book. It was a passport card, and I didn't know. I thought I could travel to Mexico and Canada with a passport card. I didn't need the book, but when you're flying, it's a different story. You need the passport book. So I show up at the airport with my card, and the person behind the counter said, "You're not flying today because you don't have the right paperwork." So just something simple like that can cause days or weeks of delays, and you may not have that. So you really need to be aware of what documentation is needed. Administrative services for expatriates. So while they're overseas, they may need translation services, things like that you wouldn't even consider here domestically, but over there may be something that's required. The relationship with the host government. Again, where are we doing business? Are we doing business in Russia, China, India, in Europe? Some of those relationships with the United States, they're very sound and very friendly. Others are a little more contentious and a little more difficult to navigate. And like I said, language translation services. So I consider that part of administrative services. But that's something that, again, wouldn't be considered here domestically, but internationally it could become a very big issue. So these are all as far as international relocation, these are some of the things that are involved. Pre-departure training, immigration and travel details, housing, shopping, medical care. Some countries have superb medical care. Others do not. And in some other countries, it could be very scarce. So you need to know where to go in case there's an emergency. Schooling information. A lot of people are relocating their families. So what types of schools are there? What's the admissions requirement? What's the translation requirements? All very important. And then finalizing compensation deals. How are we going to deliver your salary? What's the overseas allowance? Usually people don't just relocate overseas for nothing. There's usually a bump up in compensation. So what exactly is that allowance? Or what's that bump up? But then are you going to provide meals for me? Are you going to provide the medical services for me? What are all those other allowances that I'm going to be given because I'm relocating overseas? And then taxation treatment. Sometimes foreign countries don't tax salary. Sometimes they do. It's very difficult and complicated. So those are some of the things. And then 4 more moderators in addition to. So here in research, when we talk about moderators, we're talking about something that influences the direction or the impact of the outcome, either up or down. So that's a moderating variable. And I have an example here. So let's just say work stress at work leads to maybe a drinking problem. Okay, so we see that there's some form of correlation. But if there's stress at work, I have a higher chance of having a drinking problem. If there's very low stress at work, less chance of having a drinking problem. But now in the middle of that, if I put an individual with highly avoidant coping skills, okay, so stressful work, somebody who has highly avoidant coping skills, the impact of this drinking is going to be higher. So if I take that part away, we still have this correlation. If I put somebody with highly avoidant behavior in there, this impact is even higher. But if there's somebody with a less avoidant behavior, the impact is lessened. So that's what a moderating variable does. I have a correlation between an independent and a dependent variable, but when I add this moderator in there, it either increases or decreases the impact. So 4 things that act as moderators in international human resource management: the cultural environment, the industries in which the multinational enterprise, M&E, multinational enterprise, is primarily involved. So the industry itself, whatever industry involved, could have an impact on international human resource management. The extent to which the multinational relies on its home country domestic market. And the big one in this is the attitudes of senior management. A lot of these multinational corporations fail because of maybe inexperience of senior management and attitudes towards expatriates. So that the attitudes of senior managers have a big impact, act as a big moderating variable to the function of international human resource management. The last thing I want to talk about in this particular lesson is external factors that international human resource managers need to be aware of. And we're going to follow the model that is used in your book. It's the PESTLE model, the PESTLE. And each of those stand for, it's an acronym for political, economic, sociological, technological. That's the PEST part of it. And that PEST model has been used for a while. But the author of your book adds two more, which is legal and environmental. So the political environment, there's a lot going on there. Because we can talk about politics inside a country, inside of a company and outside of a company. So internal politics could include things like team jealousies, whether the projects are cohesive that are going on, or whether we have a bunch of these disjointed projects going on, personal interests in the projects. So all these things must be considered when we're managing internationally, because there's an internal politics component, and then there's external politics too, which we're probably a little more familiar with. Employment laws of the country, taxation policies of the country, trade restrictions. Some of our current political dialogue that's going right now is talking about tariffs and trade restrictions and things like that. So other countries are paying attention to what's going on in our country now, because that's something in the political environment that they have little control over. Trade reform, environmental regulations, smog laws and accords that deal with the pollution. All these things are very, very, very much on the front page today. Political stability is another one. Is there a stable political system in the country that we're working in, or is it unstable? So that's the P, the political. Economic. There's, again, we have the microeconomic portion, which are things that are going on inside of our own company. Accounting techniques, financial models that we're using in our company, the viability of certain projects. That's the microeconomic elements that are going on within our company. But then we also have the macroeconomics, interstate taxation, embargoes, interest rates, just general economic growth, inflation rates in the company, so, exchange rates. Some companies are really going through some turmoil right now, especially in terms of inflation. And the devaluation of their currency. So then exchange rate becomes minimum wage rates of countries, working hours, financing availability. Is financing available in this country? So you can see, those are a lot of very big issues. And not all of them are directly related to human resource management, but there are some things that need to be taken into consideration when you're dealing internationally. Sociological factors. The individuals within the area that you're going to work. What are the sociological norms that exist there? Is it teamwork? Is it what are the population dynamics? What are the career goals? And all those things are all sociocultural. What is the dynamic, the feel of the interactions of the people within the country? Technological is the T. What are some technological disadvantages or advantages in a country? Not everybody is technologically advanced as the United States. Not everybody has high-speed internet access and access to technology, and sometimes shipping technology into a country is very difficult because of restrictions and because of security reasons. So all those technological issues need to be taken into consideration. Legal. Employment, quotas, taxation, resources, imports. Those are all things associated with the legal environment of getting resources into a country, getting individuals into a country. There's a lot of legal accounting and restrictions that go into that. And the last part of the PESTLE model is environmental. And again, there's a whole host of environmental issues when you're going into a country. What are there? Do they have OSHA regulations? Do they have EPA type regulations like we have here in the United States? Are they part of the France Accords where they're limiting maybe the use of coal or some other things in lieu of natural gas? So there's a lot of environmental issues with other countries too. So that's the PESTLE model, and please review that in your book and maybe go online, because each of those elements has a high influence not only on the international human resource management, but on the functioning of the company itself within a foreign country. So that's a kind of a little bit of a brief summary, I guess, of chapter 1 with some of the important issues, and I chose questions for the quiz based on a lot of what we're talking about here. So please, hopefully you're watching this before you take the quiz, but go back to and review chapter 1, get a little deeper into some of these items and issues associated with domestic versus international human resource management.